Hey, I don't know if I have a favorite reading genre. I kind of jump all over the place depending on my mood or whatever things are taking up space in my brain. Last month I picked up video games as a summer hobby, so I read a lot of video game inspired books. This month I saw Superman and Fantastic Four, so I decided to try out graphic novels. I guess that's how my reading choices develop. I like to read in themes or genres. It's like creating a personal curriculum each month, and so for this month I decided to tackle graphic novels. This genre is pretty new to me. I didn't grow up reading comics, never really got into them, so I didn't really know where to really begin besides my interests and a little bit of online research. So I went to the library, kind of just wandered around the graphic novel section and challenged myself to pick 5 titles this month. And so I ended up with Maus by Art Spiegelman, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, Kick-Ass by Mark Miller, and The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. So in this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on each of these graphic novels and my experience of reading this genre. So if you're new here, I'm JB, and I make videos where I talk about books. All right, this is a straight up masterpiece. It's a bit of a heavy read. I know it's summer, but definitely not one you want to read at the beach. But this book is absolutely incredible. It is Maus by Art Spiegelman. This is the first graphic novel to have won a Pulitzer Prize. It won the award back in 1992. I was first introduced to this book back in college, but that was like 15 years ago, so I forgot most of the details. This is book 1 of 2, so I'm hoping to complete the series after the next coming month. But if you're unfamiliar with this one, Maus is a Holocaust memoir that uses visual metaphor to portray Jewish people as mice and Nazis as cats. And in this book, cartoonist Art Spiegelman, he visits his father regularly so that he can gather information, record his stories so that he can create this Maus book, which is basically his dad's story as a Holocaust survivor. And so this whole book kind of cuts back and forth between the present day conversations and the father's experiences in the past. He shares stories of meeting his wife in pre-war Poland, being drafted to the war, being a prisoner of war in a labor camp, hiding to avoid capture, losing all of his family and friends. I mean, this is just a heartbreaking read. There are some really graphic scenes in here, just a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. But what I think adds even more devastation is the way that trauma affects his way of living in the present. So it's his health, his physical health, his mental health, his relationship with his son and his wife. So not only is it a story of what happened during the Holocaust, but it's also a story of how those wounds carry from generation to generation. I feel that with written novels, I'm so used to trying to unpack sentences and word choices, but here you really have to stop and take a closer look at all the illustrations. I had to remind myself to really slow down and take a look at each panel. It's a different type of reading comprehension than what I'm used to. The illustrations just add so many layers to it. So for example, if you take a closer look, you'll notice something like some of the characters have tattoos on some of their arms. You'll notice smoke in the sky. You'll notice how certain scenes have darker shades of black. You notice small details like barbed wire. Some of the panels are even smaller in scenes where some of the characters are trying to hide. So I think this all just adds up to create a more vivid understanding of the Holocaust. Just a super powerful, really moving book. Super easy to see why it's considered a classic. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's right up there on literary merit with many of the novels I've read. And I can definitely see why it's taught in many classrooms today. Okay, They Called Us Enemy by George Takei is another graphic novel memoir. So I chose this book because I feel like I didn't really know much about Japanese American internment camps during World War II. I feel like this was a topic that was kind of glossed over in high school and most of my college classes. So I kind of just went into this book hoping to learn more about it. I had no idea that George spent 4 years of his childhood in these internment camps. I was mostly familiar with his work in Star Trek and his activism later in life. And this book kind of just blends both the past and his present. So this book is basically his family's story of those experiences in these internment camps and how it later shaped his values in life. This story is told from the perspective of George as a kid, so it kind of felt like a coming of age story. One day he's just woken up and his parents tell him that he needs to pack all his things. He has no idea where he's going, but him and his family are transported to the Santa Anita racetrack where his family has to sleep in horse stalls. Later, his family is transported again, this time to a camp in Arkansas. Again, he has no idea where he's going, but this time the camp has much more worse conditions than the one previously. When he gets there, there's this really haunting juxtaposition, illustration of the camp with nature and trees, the fences and barbed wire. And for me, I think this is one of the highlights of the book, is this art style and this juxtaposition throughout the entire thing. On one side of the page, you'll see his family celebrating Christmas. And on the other side of the page, you'll see the attack of Pearl Harbor. There's this other scene in here where you see a close-up of George's face as a kid. You know, he thinks he's having like this really fun vacation. He's smiling, playing like dinosaur games. But next to that is a close-up of his father, and he's dealing with the fear and the unknown of the situation. I think that's just like a gut-punching contrast. And in many ways, I think this is a story of two different journeys. One of his parents and the fear of the unknown, and George's, which is one of discovery. He's just a child who is forced into these internment camps, but as he grows older, he's trying to like piece these things together. So the story kind of bookends with George as an activist, kind of reflecting on all the lessons of democracy he learned along the way. I really enjoyed this graphic novel. I think it asks some interesting questions like what does it mean to be American, and what does it mean to love a country that doesn't always love you back. Overall, I think it's another incredibly powerful graphic novel memoir. It's extremely accessible. So if you're someone who's interested in learning more about this part of American history, then definitely check it out. Unfortunately, history finds a way of repeating itself. This book provides context to the past, but also makes parallels to the present with things that are going on in the world right now. And I think this is just a reminder of why stories like this are just more important than ever. All right, the third graphic novel I read this month is Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. Just a quick little fun fact, the author of this book also created the Bechdel test. You might have heard of that. It's the gender representation test that appears in films. That test first appeared in the comics in the 80s, and one of the strips of one of her characters basically shares her rules for watching films is that there must be at least 2 women in it, and these women must talk about something other than men. I didn't recognize that was her when I first picked up this book, but I found that kind of interesting. But anyways, I found this book through my Goodreads research. It was on this list voted by people as one of the best graphic novels of all time. Most books on that list were superheroes, and this one kind of stood out to me for all the awards it won. It was translated into or adapted into a Broadway musical. It also had tragic comedy in the title, so I was like, all right, let's check this out and see what it's all about. And this one just put me 3 for 3 this month for reading something that was just emotionally jarring. This book is an exploration of Alison's childhood, her dysfunctional family, the death of her father, and her attempt to make sense of the past in order to understand who she is in the present. The book opens with a portrait of her family where physical affection is kind of rare. There's a lot of emotional distance that kind of defines the household. It was a home that really sometimes felt like walking on eggshells. Her father, he was an English teacher, and he just cared more about reading. He was more passionate about like restoring old houses, gardening, kind of decorating, didn't put a lot of thought into raising a family. And so over time, Alison comes to understand that he was living the secret life as a closeted gay man, and that kind of added layers of complexity to their strained relationship. Her and her father are basically like inversions of each other. They share similar traits and experiences, but kind of live them out in opposite ways. Her father hid his queerness. Alison embraced hers later in life. He used books and literature to kind of hide. She used them to uncover the truth. He conformed to societal norms. She kind of rebelled against them. And I just really admired the craft of this book. It's just like, but before we get too far into that, just a quick warning. There are a lot of like sexual references in here. Some content about abuse, including some illustrations. Some of that content may be difficult for some readers. I know this novel is more for a mature reader than some of the other books I'm referencing in this video. And that also includes like the writing style. It feels very poetic. The vocabulary is very extensive. So if you're an English major, you'll appreciate all the super heavy literary allusions. There's allusions to Fitzgerald, Greek mythology, Dorian Gray, the importance of being earnest, the Odyssey, Joyce, Catcher in the Rye. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. Her and her father both had a shared love of reading, and so she does this to make parallels between her literature and her life. And maybe I'm just way too dumb, but these parts kind of just dragged on for me. I just did not have the knowledge or the stamina to unpack every single reference that was in every section. There's something I think you might have to read with the open browser. Some parts were just not accessible to me, and that might limit the reading experience for others. But overall, this book gave me like a different appreciation for the craft of graphic novels. It's very sophisticated in how it uses words and images to tell a story. This includes illustrations of like actual photos from her life. She includes notes, letters, quotes, dictionary pages. You'll even notice like differences in handwriting inside the dialogue balloons. The whole book just felt like really raw and honest, like a stream of consciousness. And I think Allison is just like brilliant, really introspective. You can tell she put a lot of thought and layering into every single panel. This is one you definitely really have to spend a lot of time with. Slow down. It's not a graphic novel that you can read really quick. So if you're looking for something that's a little more complex, definitely check this one out. So I'm going to guess the Venn diagram between fans of literary fiction and fans of Kick-Ass is pretty slim. Like my first 3 reads tackled heavy themes, emotional depth, carried some sort of literary weight. Kick-Ass, not so much. This book is straight violence, blood, gore, vulgar language. It's chaotic, it's wild. I was first introduced to the story back in 2010, I think. I was like 22 when the film came out. I haven't seen it since, but I remember it being a lot of fun. So when I saw it on the library shelves, I was like, let me check this one out. I like the film, why not? So in case you missed the cult-like following of this one in the 2010s, this book is about a comic book loving teenager. It opens up with him at a lunch table with his friends at school, and he's kind of asked the question, like, why hasn't anyone ever tried to be a superhero before? And his friend is like, you can't do that in real life. Some guys would just like F you up. So I thought that was funny. And so Dave, the main character, out of like loneliness and despair, he puts on a mask and a costume and decides to be a local superhero. And immediately he gets his butt kicked and wakes up in a hospital with metal plates in his hand. And that's just a reminder why we don't become superheroes in real life. To me, this book kind of felt like a mix between like Superbad and Deadpool. I think it's definitely a product of its time, and some people might find the content outdated and over the top. Personally, I often get a kick out of things like this. If you are a fan of the TV show The Boys, this might be something that's right up your alley. I went into this book just kind of looking for mindless fun. I knew there was going to be violence and swearing and blood, and that's just basically exactly what I got. There's this really cool character in here named Hit Girl. She's this 10-year-old like foul-mouthed assassin who just delivers these like brutal kills. She walking around with like knives and guns, just like mowing down grown men, shooting them in the crotch, kind of decapitating them with the katana. She reminds me of like the bride from Kill Bill. So honestly, just don't go into this book expecting any sort of meaningful depth from the story. It's not a plot-heavy read at all. It's a quick read, lots of edgy violence. Now, I feel like I can't comment much on the art style because I don't really know what to compare it to, but I felt like it did a good job of capturing like the fast-paced violence. I think the layouts brought a lot of the intensity and motion out in the scenes, very like cinematic. I think the panels are also very large. There's like only 4 in each page, so everything felt like really big and explosive. The backgrounds were also really grimy, so I think that contributed to like the superhero vibe of it they were going for, the local superhero vibe they were going for, and I think it also matched like the comedic and dark tone. Honestly, I enjoyed this for what it was. Maybe that's because I enjoyed the film. I think the high school version of me would have loved this comic growing up. Today, I can see how it might not land for everyone and have parts that might be offensive to some. Definitely a lot more shock value, and it's a product of the early 2000s. So if you're in the mood for something that is immature, violent, kind of fun, maybe give it a shot. Just don't expect any moral lessons from it. Now this feels like a classic comic book for someone who hasn't read any comics at all. I don't know if that's how Batman sounds. But this is The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. It's packed with all sorts of onomatopoeia. There's the thunks, the chalks, the screes. Batman is just out here just cracking people left and right. The whole book is basically just him just smashing dudes all over Gotham. So the reason I decided to read this book is because I'm a big fan of the Batman films. The Dark Knight is one of my favorite trilogies of all time, the Nolan films. And honestly, I also liked Batman Forever and Batman and Robin as a kid. Jim Carrey as a Riddler, Arnold's Mr. Freeze being like, everybody chill. Just like all the classic cheesy puns, classic 90s, terrible films, so nostalgic. But now I've never read any of the Batman comics. Honestly, I have no idea what comic version of Batman gives the most accurate representation of him. Now, this might not be the one to start with. I finally wanted to read this just to dive into the source material that inspired some of the more recent Batman films that we all know and love. And this comic was just really dark and gritty. It takes place in a Gotham City that has basically given up. Violence is escalating. The criminal underworld is thriving. Mutants are terrorizing the city. The police are helpless. Politicians and news reporters are just spinning stories all over the place. Commissioner Gordon has retired. Batman hasn't been seen in like 10 years. He's retired. And at the beginning, there's these really heavy descriptions of like this heat wave, and that kind of represents the boiling pressure that's happening in the city. It's like something is about to explode, but it's also a mirror for like how Bruce Wayne, Batman, feels. In this version of Batman, he's like old and beaten down. He has like all this built up rage and trauma. It's just like he has this burning desire to return as Batman. So of course he returns. And the whole comic, I think, kind of reminds me of that Nolan line, like you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become a villain. And that's like the big question in this comic. Like, is Batman saving Gotham or is he making things worse? I really enjoyed this graphic novel and this version of Batman. There was this line where he was fighting the mutants and he delivers this line, he's like, "Welcome to hell." To me, this Batman just felt like more violent than the ones I've seen portrayed in films. If I was a criminal in this world, I'd be like terrified of him. He was kind of scary at times. This Batman seems to care a lot less what anyone thinks and just kind of set on doing things his way. I liked it. Overall, I thought it was a great comic. I enjoyed the dialogue. I thought Batman's internal monologue was really fun to read. I also liked how this book is like a piece of satire. It was written in the 80s, so there's like this whole thing going on here between the Cold War, Reagan, and Superman. At times, there's a lot of like news panel, anchor, politician things going on, and to me that felt kind of tedious. The art style I thought was really cool. It gave me like that noir vibe. There was a lot of like muted and like washed out colors, and I thought that contributed to like the decay of Gotham. The characters, sometimes they looked a little distorted. I didn't really care too much about the mutants. The Joker's in this one, I thought that was really cool. He was evil. Two-Face is in this one as well. Some of my favorite characters. So all in all, Batman, for my first ever Batman comic, I thought it was great as a standalone. It gave me what I wanted, which was a darker version of Batman, and it even got Batman like leading the way on a horse, which I thought was kind of cool. I'm glad Miller wrote this story. This story basically gave us the modern Batman that all the casual fans like me know. I know the goofy stuff that gets a lot of hate sometimes, but honestly, I'm kind of curious, like, what are the other versions of Batman that are out there? Like, what comics show that goofy side of him or that campy side of him? Like, where's the detective version of him or the one who is friends with Superman in the Justice League? So if you've got any recommendations of like ones that someone who's just starting Batman should read, let me know down in the comments. All right, so that wraps up my graphic novel genre challenge for this month. I got a little bit of history, some heavy literary allusions. I got blood, I got violence, you know, just like a little bit of everything. It was a lot of fun. Honestly, I had a lot of fun trying out this genre. I'm definitely interested in seeing if I can find more historical graphic novels. I'm not normally one to read any sort of historical fiction or nonfiction books, but I felt like these made it super accessible. I think graphic novels could work as a great pair to novels. I could see someone reading Mouse and then jumping into Night. I could see someone reading They Called Us Enemy and then jumping into Farewell to Manzanar. I think doing it that way kind of gives you two ways to experience the topic. So if you're looking to deepen like your understanding of something, and I think it can also like be a gateway for someone who is more of a visual learner. I think art sometimes can tell a story in ways that words can't. And not to say that this is any easier, like graphic novels are a challenge in itself. Like you really have to pay attention to the images just as much as the words. There's all kinds of subtext. I think it's heavy on atmosphere. And I think reading this is like kind of like going to a museum. Like you have to pause, kind of look at each scene, kind of appreciate just kind of looking at it. The art style of all of these books were all just kind of really different. So I'm excited to see what other art styles exist out there and how I can kind of start to compare some of these. And especially like the superhero stuff. I find it fascinating that writers have been writing about these characters for decades upon decades and interconnecting them and building on each other's works. What is canon, what is not. So if you have any recommendations, please share them down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think I should read next in this genre. So thank you again for watching. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Really helps out this channel. See you on the next one.